very excited to have you here. On behalf of Jillian Kranius, my colleague at HC Link, we welcome you to the first of the three-part webinar series looking at collaborative partnerships. And as Jillian was saying in the welcoming remarks, it's been something that we've been working on for quite a while now. It's something that both of us continue to learn a lot about in our work. I'm sure it'll be a journey that never ends, and we're excited to share a little bit of what we've learned and to welcome our speakers, Joanne Dubois and Stephanie Goyne today, who will also be sharing what they've learned, and there'll be opportunities for participation from you, our guests. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Just wait a few seconds. I think that Kim has some difficulty with her speaker.
This is the first webinar of our three-part collaborative series, and we're very excited to have the partnerships, looking at new relationships and looking at how to bring out diverse perspectives to form a shared understanding and build a common vision. Then on May 7th, we have another one, An Eye on the Vision, Eye on the Road, working together for change. What do we know about how partnerships complete work and even decide on work, and how can we make that an efficient and enjoyable experience? And the last one on this, the part 3 on Thursday, May 28th, it's looking at kind of the last two steps of our model that we'll introduce. It's called Thinking Back, Moving Forward, Celebrating and Evaluating to Renew. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for all three of the series, and if you haven't registered for them already, please do so. And I believe that Jillian is going to put the link on shortly where you can register, and you do need to register for each of them individually. So we do hope that you'll join us for the whole series. So as I was referring to, the model that you see on your screen right now is a guiding framework for our exploration today and during the other two webinars, and we've highlighted 6 activities that you'll see on the periphery of this model. These activities were originally called the Ingredients Successful Partnership Process, and it's contained in a terrific publication by Health Nexus, which is one of 3 of the HC Link partners, and it was intended for use by family health teams, and it was published in 2009. The link to that resource has been posted by Jillian. Thank you. And it's certainly worth a look. It provides a really nice overview of this model. As you know, models are just that. They're diagrams. We know that people move in and out of different stages of models at different times, but it's a nice framework for our discussion together. So here, webinar 1, we're going to focus on the element at the top, which is connecting. How do we make connections to others that are interested in the same outcomes that we are looking for? How do we get unlikely and different perspectives at that table? The second one is working to build a shared understanding of issues, and we'll talk about the need for diversity and time to be well spent in that area. And thirdly, today we'll talk about how to create a shared vision. I'm going to pass it over to Jillian.
Thanks, Kim. So this could be me here. I don't recall having any training on the topic of partnerships and webinars, partnerships and networks, webinars too, perhaps. I think that it's true for most of us that the learning curve around partnerships is mostly on the journey training. And so there's this big challenge that we all face, and that is that working in partnerships is not automatic in our dominant culture. It wasn't that we just didn't have specific training on it, but even the kind of education and training we've had over the years has not always emphasized partnership. So it's a new area of learning for so many of us. So before we get on to the content of what we're going to share today, I just wanted to pause to highlight some learning strategies that I have found helpful and that I've shared with others in our work with HC Link, providing consultation supports to groups. So I think of those learning strategies, if anyone has kids in the school system, you get report cards that have, you know, math and music and phys ed marks, but then at the beginning of the report card, it's more about learning skills. And really, these are the essentials for us. They support us in that on-the-journey learning. So some of those key ones that we've identified are co-learning skills together. So it's great to have heard how many people are sitting around one computer together, because when we co-learn with someone that we either is on our team or we're in a partnership with, it helps us to, you know, not just build the skills, but also solidify some common reference points and some language and frameworks that can enhance our partnership bonds. Another learning strategy is to recognize how other cultures often can bring key insights and approaches to our partnerships. So cultures that are not dominant, that we don't have as much access, that have been marginalized, such as indigenous knowledge, just rural ways of working, and also the insights that newcomers from different countries can bring to us. These are real places of learning and learning strategies. And whenever we can, I certainly try and attend trainings co-led by people from these different cultures. They're not as easy to find sometimes, but I always try and prioritize that. So two other strategies to share. One is to make time for regular evaluative discussions on the journey, and we'll be focusing on that in part 3 of this series. So if you're really interested in evaluation, that's a big element in the third webinar. And finally, to learn and recognize, value, and practice those 6 activities that Kim just introduced. So it's sort of reflecting back on that framework as we go through our learnings and our experiences. Here's the formal learning objectives we have for today. And overall for the series, it's quite broadly just to learn more about the cyclic nature of partnerships, gain new insights, revitalize your toolbox. The latter part of each webinar will be sharing a lot of tools so that later on when you want to access those slides, they'll be posted online, as well as a recording of the full webinar. You can access and learn about more hands-on tools that you can use. And this webinar, as Kim's already pointed out, is focusing on the 3 activities on the right-hand side of that framework that we're using. Our agenda is after our general introduction, which we're just completing now. Kim's going to briefly talk a bit, just a broad intro again about partnerships, a look at variations, and also look at some of your experiences, because I want to thank you all for filling in the 2 questions we had in the registration form. We did a little analysis of that, so that'll be neat to look at together. Then we have sort of central part of our webinar is to hear the stories from Stephanie and Joanne, followed by a touch of theory and then those hands-on resources, and we're going to try and guard some time at the end for further discussion with you. I'm going to pass it back to Kim now.
Thank you, Jillian. So, partnerships. First, I think it's just important that we just talk about language for a little bit. Partnerships are called many things, and it's just important to know that despite the names, the real focus is on how partnerships work, what stages they go through, and how we can support partnerships as they move through those stages and go in and out of those. So whether you're in a network or a collaborative or something that's actually called a partnership, there are lots of commonalities regardless of what it's actually called. Similarly, I know that many of you have worked in a range of arrangements of these partnerships, from ones that are quite formal to others that are very informal in their workings, some that are very specifically focused on a topic, other ones that have a very large encompassing vision with other people doing very distinct activities or working on different strategies. So some of them will be straightforward, and other ones will be quite complex and layered. And again, the commonality is that we can go back to that framework and see how groups move in and out of that, and again, tools, resources, and ways of supporting groups as they go in and out. It should also be acknowledged that partnerships serve lots of different functions. They can be for information sharing, knowledge translation. They can be grassroots community action networks, and then perhaps even more formal ones around service coordination and improvement networks that you often see in health and social services. So there's a huge variety of what these partnerships look like, and yet the commonalities are that there's complexity in the work, and that the cyclical nature of the work helps guide us in how we support them. So, as Jillian said, thank you for your comments when you registered for our webinar today. We asked you what you enjoyed most about your partnership efforts, and it was really interesting to hear what you had to say. The first one, the largest one around increasing capacity, looked at, looking at new ideas, reducing duplication, having some economic gains or efficiencies there, sharing of information and knowledge, as well as that networking component. close behind that at 34% was the collaboration part, the building of relationships, that collective effort, knowing more about each other, and just feeling like you're getting more bang for your buck. Greater impact, extending your reach, working across sectors, and having more people buy into the efforts that you're working towards. And the other ones there, a very important one about the sustainability. When you have partnerships, the work tends to stay relevant as people bring diverse perspectives to the table, and you have that ongoing environmental scan, and everyone's providing their piece of the puzzle. So that is very satisfying as well. So I'll just move forward here. So we'd like to open up discussion, and Ellen will assist me here. We're going to ask if you could share one unexpected outcome that has occurred when you worked in a partnership. And if you just write your comments in the chat room box there and contribute, we'll have a look at what you have to say. So we'll take about 30, 45 seconds to see how we're doing there. So please just write some comments there. What's one unexpected outcome? Okay, I'm not seeing anything pop up on the screen just yet, so maybe we can look at that, Ellen.
I planted something. Here they come. It just takes people a while.
Mm-hmm. So yes, awareness of new resources when you, that you were never aware of. Mm-hmm. Yes, on the downside, a major partner closed their organization and left the project in a deficit. Ouch. Looking at conflict resolution skills, other people taking some leadership roles. Yeah, that's lovely to see, when, especially those who may be feeling a little hesitant at the beginning of a partnership to take those roles as they grow in their comfort and skill level. Okay. Another 10 seconds for people to add something. Letting the community know what's out there as well. Debunking false assumptions. Yes, we'll get to that in building shared understanding. Jillian, are there any comments you'd like to make at this time of what you're seeing?
I just see, it's interesting because we always use that term outcome, and what with partnerships, and we talk about the complexity, the outcomes come in all different directions. They come in terms of new leadership within the partnership. I see there. We have unexpected growth opportunities for individuals, sort of for staff, but then also that change. I think Shelley made the note there about debunking false assumptions and just the learning over time. Those of us who've been involved, and I know most people are experienced or seasoned was how they had qualified themselves, that the learning and the change in terms of how we understand issues and what we know is available in terms of resources is quite phenomenal through partnerships. So
I always find it amazing in working with groups that other people, different groups are tapped into such different resource opportunities, and that's always a lovely thing to find to consider. And I want to ask our guests as well. Joanne and Stephanie, did you have any comments about what you're seeing or anything you'd like to share at this time?
This is Joanne. I'm seeing very common threads and common experiences that I've had through my years of community development and partnerships. So it all makes sense. It is very complex. It's a web of complexity, and it's full of wonderful, unexpected outcomes and some more challenging ones. So, yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. I think what really spoke to me from these points that were raised was just how big the impact of this can be beyond the specific partnership. There's such a trickle-down effect, and how much they can really do some capacity building beyond just the partnership that you're working with in that moment. It also really speaks to how unexpected partnerships really are. As much as we can try and plan, there's just so much that comes out of them that you cannot control.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, Ellen, if we can go back to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so just as we know there are many upsides to partnering, we also asked you what challenges you had in dealing with your partnerships. And you'll see here that finding common ground seemed to be one of the biggest issues. When you have so many different perspectives around the table and competing interests, that can be a challenge, and many of us have had that experience. A little bit, the other ones were quite similar, really. Looking for resources and support to maintain your efforts and kind of keep the core going, or sometimes people will refer to them as backbone organizations, but just to keep everyone engaged takes time and effort, and sometimes that's done on the corner of a desk, and other times it's more officially mandated. So I certainly understand that. Learning to, building those trustworthy relationships with partners takes time, especially if there's been any history in the past of things maybe not being as positive as they could be, and being able to move forward. Negative attitudes, same thing. How do we, sometimes it's different people completely, and people are in a different place. And then how do we sustain momentum? Everybody can get excited about a topic or an issue off the bat, but how do we keep that momentum going? And being effective. How do we get work done effectively when perhaps you meet, monthly or every other month? How do we keep the work going in between and people motivated? So thank you for sharing that work, your comments with us. All right.
Great.
So I'll pass it on to Jillian.
Thanks, Kim. So we're just back to our framework while I go into introducing our speakers. Just to remind you, the focus of our dialogue is to hear about their challenges and the approaches and resources that they've used to connect and foster shared understanding and create a shared vision in their various partnership efforts. And we're going to begin with Joanne Dubois. Here's where both of our guests are from Southern Ontario today, so we did more of a close-up so you can see where Joanne is from. Joanne's a community developer at Grand River Community Health Center, beautiful river in the area where she lives and works. Through her work, Joanne supports a variety of partnership development efforts within the Brant County area. Among her accomplishments, she co-founded a now thriving LGBTQ task force, which is now a community coalition called The Bridge. She also co-chairs the Local Food System Network, and she's worked to facilitate partnership development between a First Nations group and a local funder. These are just a few highlights, I'll remind you. Joanne frames her work within a broad community capacity building mandate, and today she'll share with us some stories from her work on the areas that we're focusing on, the 3 activity areas. Joanne, it's really great to have you. Joanne and I have known each other through our work for about 10 years, but we've reconnected more again recently, and it's been great hearing about your recent work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the webinar and to share practice with everyone.
So the first question that we prepared for you today, Joanne, is when first connecting with groups and individuals, what is it you're trying to achieve?
I think something that was mentioned here a few times is looking for that shared vision and more of a collective impact, although there's a formalized collective impact. This community isn't quite there yet, but it's looking at bringing those diverse perspectives together and pool our resources. So perspective and resources. So it could mean volunteers, space, various partners networks, even graphic design, etc. And and also that diverse perspective is so important because you're looking for representation from the community. So I look at a community within a community when I'm working within a coalition or a group setting. And it, I have to ensure that it fits with the mandate of my organization. But sometimes I will stretch it a little bit and ask for forgiveness later because I'm seeing the response and the need in the community because you go where the energy is. So
Do you have
there
an
needs
example
to
of that, or like where you thought you were
well,
stretching a bit and it benefited in the long run?
Well, I'm thinking when I was doing some work with the Poverty Roundtable, housing is a huge issue here, and we did a facilitated session with the community, and we got very little response around people wanting to coalesce around housing issues, but we did get a larger response around food security. So then although there's a tremendous need around housing, we went with food security. And started to build a coalition there. So that's an example. So you really need to meet the community where it is, and where the response is, and looking at the strengths of the individuals at the table, and also helping to develop the capacity, and I think finding ways to open that communication. And navigate conflicts. So that's that process and action balance, so that you can there's enough activity that you're keeping people engaged, yet you're also developing process, so like in terms of reference and plans, work plans.
So I'm hearing that in your role as a community developer at a community health center, that you are able to really, your goals effectively is this gathering of resources and energy, and then sometimes formalizing that or directing it. But you're not issue focused in your work. Is that right?
It's more cause focused.
Mm-hmm.
So it's big picture work. So like food systems, the LGBT community, relationships with the First Nations community. We have a large reserve here, 6 Nations. Around the corner, we have 11,000 First Nations people. So finding ways to bridge those relationships. So they my work tend not to be issue focused.
Right, it's the community. So maybe we can turn from there to talking about the coalition that you co-founded around LGBTQ issues and that community. And you're working in a rural and small town community. You told me that you didn't meet much resistance, or the kind of resistance that I might have expected that you would have met. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us what happened when you went out to connect and involve new partners on this issue?
I was actually quite surprised because the community has been completely invisible here. There's no data. There's no active groups meeting, social groups. It's not mentioned in any community research. So I connected with Laurier. We have a Laurier University here, the prof who does gender studies, and we started to talk to different individuals. And actually, what was really helpful is our MPP, Dave Levac, is a huge proponent and actually was an advisor on our planning of our first Pride event, and also our mayor, Chris Friel, when we wrote our first proclamation, and he was more than willing to bypass City Council if he had to. So from the leadership in the community, we were received with open arms. Now this is in Brantford. We're still looking at making headway in Brant County. We haven't approached that council yet. Mm-hmm. We're not there yet. But the OPP actually have Fly the Flag now for Pride, which are in the county. So I found that a sense of relief that the community was well overdue, and there was a lot of participation. So I was able to connect with community leaders at the grassroots level as an ally, and as an ally I understood my place, and it's really leading from behind, so and supporting the leadership, and that's what I did. And
so you began with members of the community, and then you built upon your own networks. Is that how you went about connecting? Okay.
That's right. So we found strong leaders who've been doing work in the community, and also allies within agencies, and not just allies, but the people from the different organizations that started forming the coalition were part of the LGBT community who happened to work in those organizations. As well. So there just was a tremendous response. In our first Pride flag raising, that happened, I think it's now 4 years now, there were over 300 people there, and there were tears. So yeah, it was quite something. But it was really building the capacity of and giving opportunity to the leaders in the community to step up.
Mm-hmm. So you were, as you say, leading from behind, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, from behind, I was doing a lot of work because with a lot of the individuals within that community, there's lateral violence. So I had to spend a lot of time in individual conversations and building those relationships so that the bigger picture, the vision, could be kept foremost up front.
Okay. Can you maybe explain a bit what you mean by lateral violence, or give an example there?
Well, within the community, I was learning a lot. So I think being very open to the reality of that community, because it's been such an oppressed community that, let's say, there were issues between someone who would identify as bisexual and someone who would identify as a lesbian, and the bisexual wasn't legitimate, or if it was a trans person, as far as the lesbian was concerned, or so inside that community there's division. And I found that you find that with many communities, like people living in poverty or First Nations communities. So there's division, and that division has manifest because of the oppression, and then they tend to attack each other, which is really unfortunate. So I've had to, and that's not just the LGBT. I found that many communities. So I've had to, I spent a lot of time bringing awareness to that and working behind the scenes on that.
That echoes with some of my experience. I always feel under-resourced and marginalized communities are, we all face conflict, but if you don't have resources and you're marginalized, it's much harder to address your conflict. So you're bringing, from what I hear, that resource and support and openness to work through it. Do you have any other challenges that you could share with us, maybe from a different partnership where you were working to foster shared understanding, either within that partnership or in connection with trying to, bring somebody new into the circle?
Well, with the Food Coalition, you're looking at bringing the various stakeholders together, and you look at the food continuum. So you have emergency food provision, and then you have activities like community gardens that are capacity building, and then you have policy development, so around the food continuum. So you'll have traditional farmers at the table who are not environmentalists, but then you'll have organic farmers at the table, and then you'll have people who are interested in food security at the table, and everybody's speaking a different conversation and have different interests. So it takes a lot, and we're still in that process, and we're often what I find when there's that type of diversity to that level, it's very challenging to find that common ground. So I will bring in an independent facilitator who has a lot of experience with that area, whatever area I'm working in, to start having those open conversations and find that common ground.
And so how are they approaching that? What approaches what is it about their approach? I know it's helpful that they're an outsider as well, I'm sure. But I'm just wondering, of the people you brought in that you found most effective, what have they brought to it?
Well, usually it's their own experience working with other communities, so they can tell stories about successes and how people, what other communities have done, like developed a food charter or have, developed their priorities, and these are their priorities, and so give a perspective on what can actually happen. And that's very, very helpful.
Right. So and that, as you mentioned at the very beginning, the consolidating a shared vision. So that has really helped them to do that, has it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we just have a few more minutes. I want to ask you a slightly different question. You shared with us that your work is, distinct from the work maybe of other people in your organization, and that sometimes you go beyond what might be your formal mandate. I'm wondering, because this is based on some of my own experiences in doing partnership work, we always have our other relationships which are back towards our own organization. We have relationships in the partnerships, but we also have relationships with supervisors, managers, board members. And I just wonder if you have any reflection or tips on how have you fostered shared understanding with them about the complexity of the kind of work you do, and the value, where it might not be obvious, or at some point it might not have, been so concrete yet. How do you build that and foster that connection with them, those people in your organization?
Well, I've had to realize that education is a really big part of what I do. So it's not just educating the stakeholders in the community, it's internal as well. So I share information in a language that is understood. I'm persistent, and I found that I demonstrate results. So having and that because I work in a clinical environment, I have to demonstrate that the work I do is grounded in evaluation, that we have work plans, strategic planning, terms of reference. So that it's organized and we have enough process there. And also, starting to speak the language and share it. And what I find is I start to share stories of other communities or possibilities within this community. And then it becomes, what I've noticed is, it could be then on the news or another organization doing something. And then that triggers the leadership. And they go, oh, okay, now I can relate. So now once you've brought this up to an awareness level, then the connections are being made, and I find that very, very helpful. So speaking the language of the leadership is really important within your organization, and being persistent and patient.
Yeah. Right. So I'm sure all of us online can relate to that, and the fact that we do use different languages depending on who we're sharing with too. But storytelling came up there again, and I'm thinking about most significant change, which is the sort of storytelling approach to looking at what are the impacts of partnership work, and it sounds like that kind of approach really helps with getting people to understand. Thanks for sharing, Joanne. We're going to bring you back again after we talk with Stephanie, but thank you so much for sharing your experiences just now.
You're very welcome.
So I'm going to introduce Stephanie. Stephanie, over the past 3 years, has supported the development and implementation of the Durham Collaboration Framework. Stephanie works at CAMH, and thus far, 24 different agencies and organizations from 8 different sectors in the Durham region have committed to this new approach for working with children and youth and families who are involved in the mental health and addiction system and who are experiencing system-level barriers to getting their needs met. The framework involves a new service resolution and collaborative care planning process, communities of practice, shared community training, and shared values. So there's a lot of elements in this framework, Stephanie. Thanks for coming to speak with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So our first question to you is similar to our first question to Joanne, which is, when you're first connecting with groups and individuals, what were you trying to achieve?
So I think I did end up taking a bit of a different approach from Joanne, I think, and that's just because when we were first doing this initiative, we were completely new to the community and to the region. The Durham Collaboration Framework, which came out of something called the Durham Service Collaborative, is part of a provincial initiative.
Okay, Stephanie, so I have to interrupt just because a couple of people are having a hard time hearing. Could you just speak louder?
Yes.
Or maybe move your mic closer. Yeah.
Is this better?
Try a little bit more, maybe, or just project,
I'll do my best.
Thank you. That's better.
All right. I think my mic was trying, the volume was turned down too low.
Okay.
So just Just to start again, the Durham Collaboration Framework was actually part of something called the Systems Improvement Through Service Collaborative Initiative, which was a provincial initiative to create change, systems-level change in children's and youth mental health systems across the province of Ontario. That said, it was a top-down collaborative rather than an organic grassroots collaborative. So we didn't have the energy built up around this before we started. I was also working with the Durham region, however, I'm based in Toronto. Before I got started on this work, I'd actually never been to Durham region. So that said, when I was first going in to connect with people, it was all about learning. It was learning about the region and about the systems. It was learning about how the systems work, about the challenges, about the opportunities. A significant amount of effort was spent around learning the people who are the leaders in the region, who are the people who are champions in this area. Going beyond that, also to start asking questions around who are those unusual suspects. A lot of times in a region you get small groups of people who work incredibly well together, but if we were looking at going beyond these groups to really impact a systems level change, who were the people who were not traditionally a part of those small groups that are already working well, but could have real powerful impact when it came to changing the system.
Right, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, Stephanie.
Nope.
Elaine, do you have any help on the sound system? I don't want to lose people because they can't hear. Stephanie?
Yep, I'm still here.
Oh, yeah. Stephanie, you're there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, that's sounding better. I think that's sounding better. I don't know about the cutting in and out. I don't know if I can help with that, but that sounded good. Why don't we continue? So, you know what I'm reflecting as I'm hearing what you just said is sort of you were an outsider. It was top down, you know, so it really heightened for you the importance of attending and sort of approaching things with that open learning perspective and taking the time to go out with a very kind of open ear to learn about what's going on. So in some ways I think of that as, you know, the prescribed approach to starting, to connecting and getting a new partnership off the ground. How did it go?
I mean, it took a long time. Partnerships often do. In this area, we didn't have any history, so no one trusted us coming in. So it's quite a delicate thing to come in and to be both learning and eager and wanting to create change, but coming into an environment where there's a lot of history and there are already assumptions that could be in place between the players that you're not even privy to because you're so new. And there was some really key factors that I think we took, recognizing that there were these challenges. Transparency in absolutely everything we did.
What did that look like?
Every decision that was made along the way, every decision from who we spoke to in the community to how we decided to speak to those people to how the decisions were made around how to move forward, we could trace back to a conversation that we had in the community, a conversation that we had as a group, documenting all of that. We were at some points accused of being overly transparent, but I'd rather have that than the opposite.
Right, and it sounds like
transparent enough and not building that trust amongst people. So.
Right. And transparent, and I think from what I'm hearing, also accountable to the community, right? Because when we talk accountability, often people are talking like going up some hierarchy, but it sounds like, you know, we have a conversation with you, we go off and make some decisions, we come back and we're accountable back to the community about why we made those and how they had a part in it. Yeah, that's really interesting. Go on.
Within this approach, one of the things, because I'm based in Toronto and it's just a 3-year project initiative, the overall goal is basically for us to work, or me to work myself out of a job in the region. That once the project is over, they will be able to continue on the work without us there.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon setup, I think, for some of us. How do you feel about that?
Well, it was wonderful because it made me really stick true to the view that this wasn't my project, that this was the community's. And the way I saw things, it wasn't as important as whether or not the community saw them in a specific way or how they saw them or what they believed in them. So I really, throughout the entire thing, I felt myself as a facilitator, doing the work of the community, enabling the community. It's almost as if you're building a house that someone else is going to live in. So we built the house fully knowing that at the end of it all, we're going to hand over those keys and walk away.
And for those people within the community, I'm just wondering if you can describe a bit, like they already had relationships, but maybe some of them didn't, because you talked about trying to dig out people or organizations that hadn't previously been included in these kinds of collaborations. So what happened there? Like, were there any challenges? Were new organizations and new leaders welcomed with open arms, or were there, what was the trust-building challenge there, or anything else?
At a very early meeting, when we were unpacking, what are the strengths and also what are the challenges and what's behind these challenges, one of the community members raised their hand and said very clearly, we don't trust each other in this community. We don't trust the people we work with, and we don't really trust outsiders.
Whoa.
But it was really great to have that labeled. It was a really powerful, that person made themselves very, very vulnerable to go out on a limb and to say that. And it also created space for us to openly, actively, move towards a more trusting environment. And again, how did we do that? Transparency, accountability, being really active, inviting people's voices into the room who may not have always been there. It's a slow process as well. You can't just invite someone one meeting and expect the community to trust them. This has taken 2.5 to 3 years, and we're still there. It's an ongoing process of building this trust. Another big part of it was recognizing from the people in the room who will commonly take, they're always at the table, that by putting themselves in other people's shoes, they may see these things differently. So we were really concrete about building activities and role-playing situations in some of our trainings that said take yourself out of your perspective and take the perspective of one of these less vocal agencies in the community to see the situation as collaborative, this process from their perspective, and how they would feel in it, what would they need to actually feel as a member of the group.
So are you saying that if I'm the staff from the large mental health service provider, I'm going to role play in the shoes of who?
Of some of the agencies or organizations who are not as big or as vocal.
So smaller organizations, smaller groups.
Exactly.
Wow.
Or
So you found that
group as well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, ethno-specific groups. So you found that to be very transformative?
Yes, we always go back to the evaluations and how do people get the most meaningful learnings out of these things. And people said it was very, very hard and very, very uncomfortable to be taken out of their perspective and asked to take a different perspective. That was something they hadn't even considered before, but that it also really opened their eyes. So it wasn't easy, but they got a deeper understanding of what it was that they were trying to do and how it would impact the community, let's say.
Right. Oh, that's great. I love using role play. I agree with you. People are reticent, even if I have to get up and role play. I'm nervous about it too, but in the evaluations it always comes back as the strongest learning experience, yeah.
I think that's also, it's uncomfortable for people.
Yeah, but somebody put that up earlier on the screen with our unexpected outcomes. They talked about discomfort, and those are often places where we have a lot of new learning. So as a final question to you, now that you're up and going, because these activities aren't these 3 activities we've been looking at, they're not just at the beginning of a partnership. They're ongoing with a partnership, all of the activities. So what are you doing now to attend to the relationship side of things that's working well, that you would bring to other partnership work, or that you would want to advise others to remember to include?
I think I was reflecting on this morning. One of the biggest and most powerful learnings I think that's come out of GERM has been early on. You can sometimes get some people who are very vocal, but vocal in a very difficult way, let's say. They may be a little bit negative. They may ask really, really tough and critical questions. It seems like they may be going off on tangents that don't necessarily lead the conversation where you'd hoped it would go that day. They're maybe constantly questioning how this is going to work or why it's going to work or if it's even going to work. But what I've found is that those people who are so vocal, they're that vocal because they care. And those relationships are some of the most important to attend to, because in the end, they often end up becoming the leaders. People who truly spearhead it and champion it at the end. We had someone in the GERM collaborative who would almost every meeting say, you guys are talking apples and we're talking oranges, and this is never going to work, and we're not seeing things the same way. But by the end of it, she is by far the person who owns this the strongest, is supporting it the strongest, whose agency is committed time and resources to make this happen in a long-term way. So some of those more challenging relationships, they're absolutely worth putting the effort in, and they're only challenging because the people care so much.
That's a great reflection. Thank you for sharing that story. Okay, thanks again, Stephanie. And Joanne, I'm going to pass the lead to Kim now. We're going to move to a few minutes of open questioning and commentary. We have one question we've prepared, and then if you have a question or a comment you'd like to put in the chat box, or if you'd like to speak, just let us know in the chat box that you'd like to pose it over the phone, and we'll include you after that. So Kim, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Jillian. And thank you to Joanne and Stephanie for sharing a lot of insights in the work that you've done. Very different stories, but lots of key things to take from each of them. One thing that I know that is common in the work that you do, implicit but not always spoken about within partnership work, is the reality of collaborating with people and organizations who hold different resources and different levels of power. And Stephanie spoke very powerfully to that in your work and talked about one way that you address that. So I want to put an equity lens on. And I'll ask Joanne, how have you brought an equity lens to your work?
I think that it's important to bring yourself to any relationship, yourself as a person. So that means, that compassion, your ability to meet people where they are, and also that sensitivity, and also to call people on things. It's that conflict piece, not to avoid conflict. And I think I was relating a lot to what Stephanie was saying around maybe some of the stronger personalities. But then I need to bring myself as well to that table and to that personality, and engage, and in a very self-reflective way, and so therefore giving opportunity for that leadership to develop. And so I think that's important. And I've also was able to provide a lot of training, the capacity building training to individuals who were champions, to assist in transitioning into leadership roles. And I think that's really important, to find different ways to do that.
Thank you. So it really starts a lot with being very self-aware, it sounds like.
That self-reflection is really important.
Yeah, excellent. And then to have practical skills and training that help deal with either the conflict or training other people to take those leadership roles.
That's right. Sharing leadership, and then building capacity so that individuals have the ability to do so.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Stephanie, health equity in your work, that equity lens, any comments you'd like to share?
I think one of the big challenges I probably faced, and I should have recognized this going in. It's making the assumption that everyone's at the same place with this. And after recognizing just how broad a scale people are, from being very, very knowledgeable and prioritizing the issue to not even seeing why we are talking about this. How do you, as a large collaborative group, accommodate all those different points along the journey, let's say? I think some of the learnings that came from that, it is having it built into the structure, making it a topic at every single meeting. How is this included? One of the really valuable ways we tried to share or build the capacity, build the perspective in the region on the value was that in most of our case studies, so we had, as a training tool, we did a lot of case studies to walk people through what these processes would look like for children, youth, and families. So in each and every one of those case studies had the cultural and equity challenges and equity lens included within those, which, that takes it from being theoretical or an idea to being concrete, so that people can see with their own children, youth, and families that they're working with, how these topics of equity can be so important and so meaningful and can really change the outcomes, even if it seems a little bit periphery to the work that they're doing in their mental health and addiction lens. I think another big learning was the need to, sometimes when it comes to these collaboratives, you have to go beyond for specific population groups to allow them to feel like they're part of the group. Just based on sheer resources, a large agency or organization, getting people to attend these meetings can be quite easy because they have so many staff. Having one representative isn't a big deal. But when you're of an agency with just 2 people, getting one person out of that office for the afternoon is a much bigger deal, and they may not be able to do it. So how can you proactively work to support that voice still being in the room? Maybe it's going before or after, or accommodating their schedule to ensure that they feel that they are a part of it and that they are able to participate.
That's a crucial point that you've just made. How do we make it easy and enjoyable or acceptable for people to get involved? And it can be just pragmatics, and it can also just be the way that we welcome and conduct our business. So that's very helpful. All right, I see that we have some questions in our chat room. Jillian, do you want to maybe read out a couple for our guests?
You know what? I don't see any questions.
Oh.
It's me typing, actually.
That was
I'm just typing to confirm, to add a bit to what Joanne said there, but I haven't seen anybody else typing. At one point someone was, but then they disappeared. But I think, Stephanie, that's just been some great examples of how you've structured, like, just an intentional approach to structuring in the equity lens into meetings, into, how you're planning, into, right, like with those questions and keeping to come back to them. So thanks for sharing those. It looks like we have a few people typing now, so maybe they were listening so intently that they were waiting to share their questions. So Manira and Heather will just hang in there. If either of our guests want to comment further, just like I did, please feel free.
I just had one more. This is Stephanie again. I just had one more reflection on this. I think the other thing around health equity is also knowing that we're not going to have all the answers, and that there's that combined with there's always more to do. So when it comes to how to engage or how to ensure that equity lens is in there, ask the people you're trying to engage. How can we do this in a way that supports you being a part of it? How can we make this more meaningful for you? And how can we make it easier for you? So also recognizing that, we think that we have a lot of the answers sometimes, but it's often better just to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't had any questions pop up now. Certainly we're going to have make some time at the end. Oh, here's one from Heather. What advice for a new NGO that essentially replaces an older, somewhat dormant environmental council. Are you on the phone at all, Heather, to ask that? Stephanie or Joanne, does one of you want to respond to that? Do you have a sense of what Heather's looking for?
I think that I'm looking at this. It's finding, really seeking out new membership, new engagement. So getting a fresh voice in the community. So it looks like it's an environmental council. So doing some outreach to find some new voices that want to participate and really rebuild. And also, by rebuilding, I mean going from what Stephanie was saying around consulting with the new membership and having a facilitated process and coming up with a new vision. I think that's important instead of going back to the old vision.
Yeah, renewing a vision is it's a renewal, and there is, you can only see in the corner of the screen there, but celebrate, evaluate, and renew is one of the activity areas. So maybe those three things could be ideas you could think of what you might do around that. And following up, Heather, how do we integrate the old one? I'm just thinking when you celebrate, you're integrating the old one. I don't know in terms of relationships if you want to share some ideas, Joanne.
Well, I was, when you do, let's say, coalesced or bringing people together, you bring the past, the present, and the future, and have a facilitated discussion about what has been done and what can move forward from the past into the present and into the future, and then build from it instead of discarding it, because our history is really important. So valuing it, celebrating it, acknowledging it, and seeing what can move forward, and that could include people, ideas, resources. Yeah, that's what I recommend.
I think that appreciative inquiry would be a wonderful process to use for that very thing. What's been done that we need to value and carry forward. All right, so if we don't have any additional questions or comments, shall we move on? Okay.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Stephanie, for sharing a little bit about your initiatives and all the insights that you've provided. Certainly resonates with me around the three areas that we're focusing on today, on that collecting, building shared understanding, and a vision. So thank you, and thank you so much for sharing the challenges and the innovative ways that you've addressed those. I've learned lots already, and we're only a little halfway through, three-quarters of the way through. So a touch of theory. As we said at the beginning of the webinar, we intended to provide, learn from some storytelling experience in the field, add some theory, and support that with resources and tools that you can take back to your work. So that's what we will do now. So conditions of success. I think that these are some broad, overarching considerations that appear to predict whether or not a partnership will be successful. And, of course, these are taken from the research, and there's lots and lots to be read, and there's resources on the HCLink website under collaborations and partnerships. You can go there for what are those criteria. But in a nutshell, I think it's fair to say that, not surprisingly, nothing breeds success like success. So having a culture of cooperation within an organization or community, and that having that history of a successful effort, it leads to feelings of trust and of that mutual understanding of mandates and people's motives, and you develop that confidence in the ability to work well together. When you have an issue that has relevance to your community, they've identified it as being important, there's some immediacy to addressing it, and someone then steps up to the plate to organize or provide leadership, and that can be in very different ways. And then you can make some connections around that. You're off to the races. And then if you can tap into resources, whether it's dollars, people, skills, and indeed that history, that really does set the stage for having the conditions of success. again, that political support in some cases can be very helpful in some environments. And as Stephanie alluded to in her recounting of her situation, her collaborative, sometimes when groups, it's top-down perhaps, and it's perhaps more suggested strongly that people get together, that has very different dynamics there. So one really has to address kind of that energy and the intent that people are coming to those meetings if it's a little bit other than their own idea. So those are key considerations there. So from there, we'll talk about some additional criteria for success, and these are, creating that bond of trust and demonstrating openness to learn other people and organizations' perspective on things, to work as a team for consensus and to consult widely, and certainly Stephanie gave some excellent examples of how she has done that and was very open and transparent, and to really respect the organizational mission of each partner. When groups come together, I think that we're often under false assumptions of what different groups are, perhaps mandated or what their role is in any given situation, and it's only through that listening that we clarify that and get that information straight and check out those assumptions, and it's so crucial. The more we can learn about other people's perspective and their role and what they even might like to be doing versus what they are doing right now, that's so helpful in understanding the issue. Along with that, respecting the expectations and the limits of each partner. In some cases, organizations are simply, and a case I'm thinking about around a hoarding issue in one community, I worked with the police and the fire departments as an example, had extraordinarily clear mandates and limitations about what they could bring to a situation, and for the other community members to fully realize what those were was enormously helpful in the group together creating a more humane and compassionate response, knowing what other people had to do. Further to that, sharing of power, risks and responsibility. And Stephanie spoke to that beautifully when she talked about, walking in other people's shoes and that role-playing as one strategy to understand how others feel. Investing in resources together. Everybody brings very different things to the table, and things that you may never have imagined before that were possibilities. They often pop up, and it's just lovely to see. And then the encouraging commitment and permanency from stakeholders. And again, that to me speaks of relevancy. How do we make the work that's done at a partnership level meaningful and relevant for everyone there? It advances the work that they are required to do and that they want to do. All right, so the first, going back to our model of the 6 steps, we talked about connecting with others, and our speakers both talked a lot about how, the importance of connecting with others and clarifying the need for a partnership. And as I was reflecting on this last night, I thought, in a way, it's almost like you have to have a bit of an elevator speech to be able to clearly articulate to people what perhaps your vision is of partnership and what it might include, and as a starting point for a conversation. And the question I always ask is, what is it that we can do together that alone we're not able to do? And sometimes that's not immediately evident, but at least it puts that question down and gets people thinking. Secondly, as it's been noted before, to engage diverse perspectives. Who's not at the table who we need to learn from? Who are the unlikely bedfellows, if you will, that need to be brought? And especially historically, when people have worked on an issue, it's easy to just bring the usual suspects back to that table, but I think it's really important to think beyond that. Whose perspective are we missing? Who do we really at first glance never even think had a consideration or a point of view about this work? And we'll get to a tool that will help us identify that a little bit later. And again, consider the motivations and mandates of those around the table and be respectful of those, and yet be creative as to how you work with those. I'm actually going to go ahead to one slide because I think that the creating a common understanding I believe is the next slide. Oh, it's not advancing for me. Sorry, that was out of order. So developing a shared understanding, and again, I won't belabor the point, but every group understands an issue differently, and again, it comes back to some basics like language. What do we mean by this or that? Often, that needs to get cleared up in an ongoing way. It's helpful sometimes to learn, as I said, what our mandates are. How do they line up? How do they overlap? How are they different? And to look in the past and see how has an issue been addressed before. What did we learn? What worked? And when things don't work, why was that? Because there's always a really good reason as to why it didn't. And what can we learn from that? And one of the key questions I love is, what don't we know? And where can we find out? Was it worth taking some time and effort to find out what that is, or who might know? And whose perspective are we missing? And then the third part of that is creating a common vision. Now, although these seem quite separate, really, those elements of a common vision will be popping out throughout these three stages, especially under that shared understanding. We'll get an idea of what people really are shooting towards and how common it is for everybody, and people will be seeing where their place is or where they fit into that larger vision. So visioning exercises, a vision statement is intended to unite and inspire people and to make a place for everybody to kind of see where their work is in. Creating a vision in and itself can be a really valuable exercise for people to be really clear on what it is that everybody wants. In terms of some tools, we'll get to that a little bit later, but visioning, there's so many ways of doing visioning, and I'm sure each of you have your preferred way, but it can be things like guided imagery, or people saying in 10 years we would like to do this, and it can involve drawing or putting ideas or words or images on cards that are later sorted on a wall and themes emerge. But what I'd like to say is that the key thing is just to make whatever visioning exercise that you decide to do really fit with the group that you're with. Nothing is much more painful than to see people who are highly creative and just itching to get those markers out or create something visual and to have to put paper to pen and to have a perhaps more linear approach. So just really know your audience, and of course that goes for everything that you do.
You can keep it on. I'm on.
Hey, Jillian, am I going to pass this over to you now?
Yeah. We're going to go back and forth a bit during the resources. I'm just doing a time check and seeing that we have 20 minutes left, so we have a lot of resource slides. Let me just say as we go into them that, as somebody asked in the chat room, these slides will all be available online, definitely by next week. And so we're going to go through, I think, quite quickly right now, maybe half a minute on each slide. But then I'm hoping that'll save us a bit of time at the end, that if you want to take us back to one in particular, if you have a question, you can ask that. But you can also follow up with either Kim or I or anyone at HC Link if you're interested in using a resource and just looking at what's available online isn't enough for you, then we often have chats over the phone with people about how they might want to use something or find other ways to support you. So we've gathered a bunch of resources. These are all related to the three activities we're focusing on today. Sometimes they're not specific to one, but to these three. The first slide here is a bit left field in terms of a tool, but I think the tool here, or the resource here, for me in my work is time, and taking the time to, as I had mentioned earlier, learn from different approaches and dig up. And I have to say I'm in the process of this, so I don't have a lot to offer you at this time. But because I've found so much insight in the Indigenous knowledge frameworks in terms of how I can bring that to the Healthy Communities work and the partnership work, I wanted to share some links with you. The bottom three are all kind of blog posts, so they're short little reads, and they can be very helpful. And then I did, because what's interesting is that a lot of the tools we use are often based on approaches or even, techniques and tools that are coming from First Nations. And I've just put in the chat box, because I found this so recently, it's not in the slides, but an article by John Swanson which talks about open space technology. Some of us are familiar with that approach to meetings, and it talks. He makes reference to the roots. It's actually the guy who coined the term open space gathered a lot of insight from Indigenous communities in parts of Africa, and then John, who is from the West Coast, I believe, reflects on that in a First Nations Aboriginal context. So it's a great little read as well. It's only like 2 to 4 pages. So, but again, really, if I look back on the stories that our guests were sharing, really taking the time is the strongest strategy that sort of is overarching to what they've all done. And I know Kim and I in our work, when we're working with partnerships, sometimes there's a concern that we haven't done enough action, but taking the time with the relationship part is certainly an important tool. So now we're moving on to these kind of more what you can find on the internet tools. This one is a great one, particularly around the connecting section, and this is from the Chapter 3 of this resource from Wild Rose Foundation, which focuses on know yourself. And I think a couple of people have already made reference to that about, who am I coming to this, and who is my organization as I approach this partnership, and what's realistic, what are my priorities, what's our readiness, and what are our limitations, so that we can be really transparent and open about that. So there's a link there. You can click on it now, or as I mentioned later, when you get the slides afterwards, you can click and find those resources. And Kim's going to speak about this one.
Thanks, Jillian. This will be a familiar site to many of you. This is the Public Health Ontario Stakeholder Wheel. This tool can be used at all stages of partnership development. It's often helpful in the initial stages as you're identifying, who do you want to reach out initially to have those starting conversations. And again, I like it because it does identify the different sectors there, as you can see: government, private, community, grassroots, non-health, and health, but you could certainly add your own if they were more relevant. And then look at different ways of being involved, from a very involved in a core perspective, whether that translates to being on a steering committee or a working committee or the executive, so to speak, to those who are more involved, and then supportive and peripheral. So it's very helpful as you move through your work, because you can see where you may want to reach out to those in the outer rings and bring them in a meaningful way. And the last point I'll say is that I think we spend lots of time looking at ways to engage people in that core way, but not necessarily look at really effective ways to get people involved in the more peripheral ways. And I think that we really need to be cognizant of that. So I'll just also note there that there's another link to a tool from Unison Community Services, and it's really terrific. It's a table that one fills out looking at your stakeholders and their connection to the issue and priorities. And as groups do that, you better understand who you're working with and where there may be some synergy. So I'll leave it at that and hand it back over to Jillian.
Okay, somebody mentioned they had trouble with that link. I'll try it again later. I was on my way there. But the opportunity tracking sheet, this is just something that was shared with me, someone who was a colleague of mine previously, Zuja Kukukla. She was working for the Diabetes Education Center at Unison Health and Community Services. That's a community health center. And they would go out and try and build partnerships. These are like smaller, more two organization group, 2 to 3 partnerships. And she developed this template really to guide her work, and also because she was working in a team, to be able to share it back. So there's some valuable questions in here to take to when you're going out and meeting with people, or just when you're in that exploratory stage, if you're in that place where you don't know the community so well, and also if maybe you're working with a team, and so when you are doing that relationship building, you also want to share it back with the team. So we're sharing this one as some useful questions in a template that might be of interest to people who like to work that way. Kim.
Yeah, stages of group development. I'm sure none of you are strangers to this, to Tuckman's theory here of forming, storming, norming, performing, and then an additional one of adjourning. So it's key to know that groups move through these at different stages and can kind of go in and out of them, but by looking where people are, there is definitely some strategies that you can pull out of your back pocket and support people to move forward. So I think it's helpful when people are really in that messy, storming part of trying to get that shared understanding and clarify what the vision might be. When you can ground it in this theory, it makes people feel like, oh, okay, this is normal, this is expected, and we'll get through this. So lots has been written on this, and it's just a bit of a touchstone piece that I quite like. So there's lots of information there online for those who would like to have a look at that.
Okay, and some of you might be familiar with the Asset-Based Community Development website that comes out of the U.S., and they have some neat resources there. This one in particular relates to some of the things you're talking about today, because it's a Creating Welcoming Places workbook, and you can see from the table of contents that it's sort of 25 pages long, and it's all around deciding to be a welcoming group. How do we identify and invite new members? How do we ensure that we're welcoming them? What kinds of structures, what kind of changes? And some of those might be really subtle changes in the way that we work as a partnership can ensure that we are welcoming to those people who are in the forming stage. I think it really speaks to the forming stage when we're an existing group, so we've already formed, but new people are wanting to form a relationship to us. So this is a really thorough workbook that a group may choose to use, or you might just want to refer to it for some ideas and some thought-provoking options.
So tools and ideas to build that shared understanding. And one of the reasons I like this picture is that people are in these chairs, but they're looking in all sorts of different directions, and you can see that they've actually moved their chairs or swiveled around. And that just to me was resonated about how we need to look in different perspectives in different ways to fully understand things. So in terms of really concrete ways of doing this, just to Jillian's previous slide, when you're, for lack of a better word, onboarding, which I think is a human resources term, getting new members involved, how do we get them up to speed and make them have them understand the context of what's happening in the group? How do we allow them to quickly understand the diverse perspectives around the table? And then also, equally importantly, how do you make a welcoming place for them to introduce what they're doing, where their organization comes from, and what their perspective is? So you're constantly building on what you know already. So there's some groups are very intentional with how they welcome members and get them up to speed, and I think that that's a really nice way to make sure that that step is not missed. We talked about even simple things like icebreakers that can be used really at any meeting or gathering that you have. And the question being, you might ask the group is, when I first thought about this issue, and they can fill in the blanks, and now I think. And to perhaps use some of the liberating structure ideas where they share in different ways, maybe in pairs and then larger groups and then with everybody. And again, that fosters understanding in a way that's informal, intimate, if you will, because you're talking to small groups, and you get lots of detail there. So I would encourage you, definitely, the Liberating Structures, the book or the website is just a terrific source of creative and engaging, energizing ways to do that sort of work. And I'll just give one more example from a group that I've had the privilege of working with, and you'll be hearing from Amy Mack at our next webinar. This is a group in London and working on falls prevention in older adults, and they're very intentional about getting to know each other's perspectives through having partner presentations at the beginning of each meeting. And while this, many of these people have worked together before, it's just amazing to see how much new information comes up. And people, I think, have found this very, very valuable, or to meet even in different spaces and just get a sense of what's going on. And second to that, again, another thing that can be on an agenda or the beginning of meetings is to have an ongoing environmental scan, a living environmental scan, a piece of big flip chart paper that you bring to your meetings and update as with everyone in the room, so you're constantly understanding what's happening in your environment. So this is a few of the ideas that Jillian and I have brainstormed there, and I'm sure you have lots of examples to share with us as well. Key point here, it's ongoing. A nice little example here of, having a dialogue in your meetings or gatherings and to talk in pairs or small groups. What change do we want to see? What impacts do we want to have towards change? And what quality or principles of working together will be important? So having some very focused questions for people as to how they want to, what it is they want to see in terms of a vision, an outcome. Just having pointed questions can be so helpful.
Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about paper quilts. You can kind of see here what they are, but it's just another way to deepen and add a kind of breadth to our conversations when we're working either individually or in small groups, and then bringing that to a larger group. So I'm going to go really quickly here because I want us to save a little time at the end. But just to let you know, you can always follow up with any of us at HC Link for help if you'd like to apply this and you don't want to just grab and go. But the basic rules that I use to guide, inviting people to draw, is to ask them to draw a picture, a symbol, or 1 to 2 words. And those words can be in any language, which is a really nice way to be inclusive. And then when people present them, they'll just translate them. And here are some questions that were asked. What's the broader purpose of my work within this team? So that's a bit of that, self-reflection about where do I fit. And the other one was with an existing group asking, why do I care? And so that was a bit about looking at identifying the common values and the common vision. And these are really nice ways to sort of add into reports later as well, because it adds a visual dimension. And it certainly includes people. The one on the right included a whole gamut from youth who had been gardening and become garden leaders who were at this strategic planning to, an academic prof who put like a really graphic, conceptual diagram to people who, threw in a few words, different kinds of volunteers, and people express themselves different ways, and it's great.
Yeah, shared vision. I think I touched on this earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time, but again, the key message being that whatever visioning exercise that you do, just make sure it's a really good fit with your group. It's not a bad thing to stretch people and have them do things in different ways, but just check it out with them and make sure that they're comfortable.
Okay, that kind of wraps up the actual tools that we have in the slides. This is some research that was done by Ontario Public Health Association about what were the critical success factors in their work groups, which are really voluntary work groups that people get involved in and then start doing work together. So if you look at what's highlighted here, I know we're going to pass quickly through this, but you'll be able to look at it again later. A lot of these critical success factors relate to the 3 activities we've been talking about today.
And in a similar fashion, the 5 good ideas that you'll see here on your slide from Anne Gloger really just summarize what we've talked about here. Taking responsibility for choices and respecting choices of others, having some empathy, and demonstrating that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and making working together, enjoyable and effective. And again, making collaborations very human. It's relationships that drive these things. Again, it's a wonderful resource. If you haven't already, check out the Maytree Foundation's website for all sorts of great ideas.
They need more time.
Okay, so I think that we've touched on this one. So things to think about as you move through these 3 stages, because sometimes it's hard to know. I mean, you get a sense of that things are going well, but things to ask. Is the group making satisfactory progress on the issue? Is it worthwhile for people to keep coming out to your meetings or stay involved? You want to have some momentum going forward, obviously, and just be mindful that relationship nurturing is a key component there. Is the effort and conflict required to make progress reasonable? You will have some of that. It's inevitable, but you want on the whole to for people to say, yeah, it's worthwhile me being there. Okay.
Great.
Daniel can refer to that.
These are just some final websites, and reminding you about our next webinar in the series. We just want to put up the questions that came from two people in the chat room and see if either Stephanie or Joanne had a comment on those. I just typed them in. Ellen, can you just move over the chat box and expand it for our last 3 minutes? Thank you. Okay, I just copied those in, and they're right at the bottom of the screen right now. From Judy Tyson, we heard, how do you measure the success of a partnership or integration's effect on client success? And I will just mention, Judy, someone may have a comment to that now, but we're focusing on evaluation in the third part of this series as well. And from Talia, has asked, I've found some organizations get skittish when they hear the word partnership. What have you done to overcome fears? Stephanie or Joanne, would you like to speak to one of those?
I'll speak to the first one, to Judy, about evaluation. I won't go too far into it because by the sounds of it, you are talking about it at a later date. But just wanted to acknowledge it's really hard when it comes to trying to actually evaluate the impact. A lot, especially on clients, a lot of time it's not felt for significant months, years after. These are long-term benefits, not necessarily always in the short term. And as well, how do you pull it apart from everything going on in the community? That said, with our initiative, we've had a really concrete evaluation process. It's a requirement that we actually understand the impact. While we're still
have the afternoon huddle staff, please, at the front desk.
Sorry about that. Continue there, Stephanie. Yeah.
And while we're still, it's not perfect by any means, a lot of it has come down to doing feedback surveys with clients to understand both beforehand what was your situation, how was this for you, and then after, has anything changed, is anything different because of taking this collaborative approach. Also doing surveys with the staff members involved in the partnerships and in the collaborations. Questions such as how many, connections, how do you feel your relationships in the community have improved, yes or no? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are your relationships in the community? Are you reaching out to people who you didn't know before starting this partnership? It's not necessarily perfect, but I think I really tried to dig into evaluating the impact of collaborations. It's a very, very complex and messy thing to understand how these impact people, especially because ideally it will be a long-term impact. It's creating a foundation in some ways for ongoing work, and you don't see the results of that for years down the road potentially. So,
thanks, Stephanie. So unfortunately, we've run out of time for discussion. We're going to try and jig that for the next webinar so that we have a bit more space, because it's really interesting to hear your questions. We'll see if we can follow up in other ways to those questions that were posed that weren't answered to. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Especially thank you to Joanne, and thank you to Stephanie for the role you played today. And you'll always be able to contact us further or join us at our next webinar. And just to let you know, as we close the webinar, you'll be immediately redirected to a link for a feedback survey, which we'd love to have you complete either now or via a link that will be sent to you as well through your email. So there's a couple of options there, and if you have the time, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you, everyone, again. And wishing you a great afternoon and ongoing success with your partnership.
Thank you.